Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. We will take 30 seconds of silence. Softly open your eyes. Thank you for joining us for this Bhagavad Gita series. Um, so, third chapter, as I said, very celebrated, very important chapter. So, as far as possible, I'll speak very mindfully. I put my phone away and I'll avoid distractions. If you have any questions as we go, please either unmute and feel free to ask your questions, or you can type them in your chat box. We will record this session. This session is recorded both on YouTube and Zoom, and we'll send you the links later. And there will be a breakout session in the middle of the presentation where you can partake in discussion with the others in the group. So we have been going through this journey with all of you in reading the Bhagavad Gita. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita began with Arjuna's doubt. He is in a situation, he is the foremost warrior of his time, the Michael Jordan at the NBA Finals, and at his seminal moment, at his biggest test in the Kurukshetra battle, he has to decide whether to fight and kill his relatives or to be non-violent, to renounce. So right at that time, he gets cold feet, inspired by God in his heart. He gets cold feet and he begins to question what is what. And we discussed how this kind of doubt is often the beginning of spiritual realization, beginning of spiritual life. Spiritual life begins with a doubt: who we are, what should we do, who God is, what our relationship with God is, what this world is, what our relationship with this world is. So we began there, and very wisely, Arjuna surrenders unto his chariot driver, his close friend, and God himself, Krishna. And Krishna begins to speak in the second chapter, and Yamuna Prabhu took us through so nicely. I heard the recording. Very wonderful class on identity. So, the first teaching of Krishna is we are not this body, we are not this mind, we are an eternal spark of consciousness or energy. So he encourages and goads Arjuna. Oh Arjuna, you are not this body. The people in front of you who are your grandfather Bhishma, your beloved teacher Drona, and so many of your relatives on the other side, they are. There was never a time when they didn't exist. There will never be a time they will never exist. So we are all eternal, and hence fight, do your duty. So he then also talks about various other subject matters. So he talks about We'll go through the summary of the second chapter itself in a bit. He talks about Buddhi Yoga, the yoga of intelligence, and he also talks about Sthita Prajna, a person whose intelligence is fixed. Very, very interesting chapter, very long chapter, second chapter, very ably covered by Abuna Prabhu. And now we come to the third chapter. In this journey, it's important to understand the different chapters as they are, but it's also important to understand the flow. So the first six chapters are on the path or the journey of the individual, you and I. The second six chapters will be on Krishna and his energies, God and his energies. And the final six chapters will be on the world. What is this world around us? How do we interact with this world? What is the relationship of this world with God? So, in the first six chapters, we will go through doubt and identity in the first two chapters, and now we'll go through the topic of duty. But before we do, let's quickly sort of summarize the second chapter. Second chapter, the first teaching was on identity, that we are a spark of energy, a spark of infinitesimal spark of consciousness called the Atma, or the spirit soul, which is separate from the body, which is separate from the mind. So I was thinking, what is the significance of understanding our identity? Anyone would like to venture a guess? What is the significance of understanding our identity? What does that lead to?
Maybe understanding higher purpose.
Who was that? Sorry, I couldn't.
I was saying maybe it could help to lead you to discovering your higher purpose.
Thank you, Erika. Yeah, that's a very good point. So, understanding your identity leads to thoughts which lead to action. Even if you misunderstand your identity, oftentimes people ask this question, I don't know why I acted that way. So, oftentimes we act a certain way because we are attached to an identity. Of course, there is the real identity, and as like Erika says, if we understand our true identity, that leads to self realization and that leads to us realizing God. But even if we misunderstand our identity, that leads to thoughts, and thoughts lead to action. So, understanding our identity properly is very, very important. That's why Krishna begins his instructions in the Bhagavad Gita by describing who we are, what our identity is. So, quick summary of this second chapter. Like I said, the chapter begins with Arjuna surrendering and his indecision. In fact, very interestingly, the chapter in the verses 2 to 10, in addition to Arjuna's sweet surrender unto Krishna, there is also Krishna chastising Arjuna. Don't give in to this degrading impotence, Krishna says. Very, very strong words to shake him up a bit. He is getting mentally depressed, and as his life coach, Krishna wants to give him a shake before he speaks transcendental wisdom. Then he speaks transcendental wisdom. He talks about the difference between the soul, who we really are, and the body, our outer covering. And he goads Arjuna, oh Arjuna, you are not this body. It is your duty to fight. Fight. And then he further talks about duty, and he says, do your prescribed duty. That is what is good for you. You're not this body, you're not this soul, you're the soul, and hence you're not going to kill anyone permanently. They will have a change of body, and this is all arranged by me, so fight. Then he says, it is your duty. You have a particular body, type of body, where you are a warrior, and it is your duty as a warrior, as a king, to establish justice. Injustice has been done, as we saw in the introduction on the very first session. injustice, many kinds of injustice has been done to Arjuna and his brothers. So you right the wrong, Krishna says, and that is your duty because you are a warrior. If one is a policeman, it is the duty of the policeman to enforce the law. Then Krishna also went on to speak Buddhi Yoga and Niskama Karma Yoga. Niskama Karma Yoga means performing one's activities without attachment to the results. This was very nicely described by Yamuna Prabhu last week. And Arjuna becomes very excited by this topic, very interested in this topic. And he says, what are the symptoms of a person who is established in such a consciousness, who is acting out of spiritual intelligence, who is performing activity without being attached to the results? The Sanskrit word for such a person is Sthita Prajna. And Krishna describes the aim of such a person, the work of such a person, and the destination of such a person. Very celebrated verses 55 unto 72 of the second chapter, which describe this topic of Sthita Prajna. Very wonderful chapter. So that's a quick summary. So we are going to see about duty in this third chapter. But before I begin, I wanted to ask all of you a question. So, in the second chapter, Krishna is encouraging and goading Arjuna to fight, and he is saying, it is your duty. Of course, all of us have a body, and we are spirit soul. So, there are two kinds of duties. One is the duty because we have a type of body, and another is duty or constitutional duty because of who we fundamentally are, because we are a spark of eternal spark of consciousness, because we are Sat, Chit and Ananda. So these are the three features of the living entity. Sat means eternal, Chit means full of knowledge. In our constitutional stage, we are full of knowledge, and most wonderfully, Ananda. Ananda means we are full of bliss. We are very, very full of happiness in our constitutional stage. Of course, when we have material desire, when we are ignorant of the reality, we have ignorant desire or material desire. And this desire to enjoy separately leads us to have a body. Depending on the specific type of desire, there are many millions of, there is 8.4 million species of life, and from one of those species of life you get a particular kind of body depending on our desire. So when we get that body, these features Sat, Chit and Ananda get covered. The body is not eternal, so the covered feature is the body is temporary. Chit, we are no longer full of knowledge. Even though constitutionally we are full of knowledge, because of our ignorance, because of the material desire, because of acquiring the body, this aspect of us of being full of knowledge is covered. Of course, very sadly also, the aspect of us being full of happiness is also covered. We come into this world, and in this body, in this world, happiness is dual. There is the other side of the coin, always with happiness, which is sadness. And happiness in this world is also temporary and ephemeral. So having said this, having defined identity in the second chapter, can you guys venture to guess the duty that Krishna is asking Arjuna to do, to fight? Is that duty of the body or duty of the soul? Any guesses?
I think it is the duty of the body.
Yes, many of you are responding. Some of you have responded soul and some of you have responded body. So this is a topic which bewilders many people. So I want to clarify up front. It is the Arjuna's duty to fight is the duty of the body. He has a particular type of body. He is his mind and his body are tuned to be a warrior. Okay, so as long as he has that body, and as long as there is a very valid reason to, he has to fight. In this particular case, injustice has been done to his own wife and his family and those who are innocent, and hence it is his duty to fight as a Kshatriya, as a warrior. Kshatriya, the word Shat means hurt, Triya means to alleviate hurt. So that is his duty, is to alleviate hurt of the innocent people, and that is the duty of his body. So Arjuna then has this question, right? Very fair question. Oh Krishna, you are asking me to fight, but you are also saying I am not this body. Fighting is the duty of the body. So why should I fight? So that brings us to the very first verse of the third chapter, where Arjuna says, "O Janardana, O Keshava." These are all wonderful names of Krishna. I'll describe them. Why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruitful work? If you think, Krishna, that I I am not the body, and the nature of my body is to be a warrior, and hence I have to fight. Why are you asking me to fight? Because I am not the body. Isn't it better to not engage in this fruitive work of fighting, rather intelligently can't I renounce? And he very interestingly calls Krishna here. He doesn't call him Krishna directly, he says Janardana. The word Jana Ardhana means one who protects the Jana. Jana means people in general. One who protects the people. Oh, protector of the people, oh Krishna, why do you want me to kill? He is asking. Very, very intelligent question. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, one thing I personally really appreciate is the role of Arjuna. How, although we are not there in front of Krishna, he asks all the questions that I would have. For example, when Krishna speaks transcendental wisdom later on in the fourth chapter, Krishna will later on in this third chapter itself, Krishna will talk about lust, and Arjuna will ask how to defeat lust. Wonderful questions throughout the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna's questions shine so brightly, so helpful. So in the second verse, he then says, why are you not telling me one thing? You're telling me two things. In the previous chapter, like I summarized, on the one hand, Krishna talked about duty. On the other hand, he also talked about buddhi yoga, performing yoga, performing the activities of your life with intelligence. And to Arjuna, it seemed like he is talking about both asking him to work and renounce. Please tell me one thing, do not confuse me, Arjuna says. So Krishna then speaks, Lokosmindvi Vidha Nishta. He says there are two kinds of people in this world. One kind of persons are more inclined to work than to think. Such persons are constantly making plans, constantly they are ambitious. If they had some free time, they would have a lot of ideas on how to do things and how to logistically execute those things. So these are people who are karma yogis. So yoga means to link, to connect with the Supreme. So these are people who connect with the Supreme through their work, who perform prescribed work. On the other hand, there are people who think more than they do. I myself do more than I think, but I have several friends who think more than they do. They are constantly contemplating on different things. They are intellectually inclined, and they are thoughtful persons, but they are not super action oriented. So they are called jnana yogis. people who want to link with the Supreme, who want to link with the absolute truth. Remember last week, Yamuna talked about the absolute truth. There are three levels of absolute truth and so on. They want to link with the absolute truth through knowledge, through their cognitive capabilities. So Arjuna's view is these are two different paths with two different goals. But Krishna corrects him in this third verse and says these are two different levels on the same path. So this is the beginning of the description of the yoga ladder. Okay, yoga ladder has several steps, and there are parallel yoga ladders also. I will describe this in greater detail as we go on, as we go through these different topics. But we already saw some of this in the previous chapter. The bottommost rung of the yoga ladder is performing one's activities uh, uh, outside of the codes of civility, outside of the codes of scripture. So that is the low. That is perhaps the floor. Then the first step of the yoga ladder is called karma kanda, which is performing one's activities within the codes of civility. Even though it is for one's selfish desire, you perform the activities within the codes of civility. You don't steal, you don't kill, you don't break the laws of nature, but you do things out of selfish desire. Above that is performing activities. You still have material desire, but you want to link your activities. You want to do it in harmony with nature, with harmony with the Supreme. So that is the next step of the yoga ladder. That's called Sakama Karma Yoga. Sakama means you still have material desire. Above that is Niskama Karma Yoga, performing your activities without attachment to results, without material desire, not from a I-centric model, but rather from a you-centric model or a Krishna-centric model. You have God at the center, you have others at the center, and out of service, you perform those activities, not out of selfish desire. So, and that is the steps of the Karma Yoga ladder, and there are further ones. Then there are steps of the Jnana Yoga ladder. We'll discuss this as we unpack the subject matter as we go. So, in the fourth verse, Krishna continues and says, Na karmanam anaramban nishkarmyan, which means, let me first explain Arjuna's understanding, then I will say what Krishna means. Arjuna's understanding is if you perform an action, there is a reaction. If you perform karmic activity, there is bondage. Third law of Newton, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Today, if you perform some hurtful activity to some other living entity, at some point in the future, you will face the reaction to performing that activity. This is basic law of karma. This was Arjuna's understanding. And by extension, as corollary, Arjuna's understanding was also if you do not perform an action, there will be no reaction. So inaction leads to no reaction. So this was Arjuna's understanding. But Krishna corrects him. He says, inaction can lead to reaction. How can inaction lead to reaction? If we do not perform an activity, how can we get a reaction to that? Any guesses? Okay, let me try to explain. So, when we do not perform an activity, but we still mentally contemplate. So, just because someone doesn't say something or do something doesn't mean they are not contemplating that mentally. When we mentally contemplate also, there is a reaction to that. So in action, just because we don't perform an action doesn't mean there is no reaction. He corrects Arjuna there. Arjuna wants to give up the fighting, and because he thinks it's sinful to kill other people, especially his near and dear ones, and he doesn't see the point in gaining the kingdom by performing such an activity. He thinks that will only lead to hell for him. So, in exchange, Krishna is saying, don't think that if you don't perform the action, if you run away from your duty, you will get no reaction. If you run away from your duty, you will get a reaction equal to that abandonment of duty. And this is where Krishna says, it is better. So, remember the third chapter, first verse that I described earlier was Arjuna wants to know this way or this way. Should I renounce my actions or should I stay and fight? Tell me one thing, Krishna. Don't talk about Buddhi Yoga and Karma Yoga equally. Which is better for me? So, Krishna here is describing that it is better, it is worse to be a meditator who renounces everything, goes to the forest, doesn't fight, which is his duty, and be mentally contemplating. Because Arjuna has this nature. When we have a particular nature, we are forced to act within that nature. If our nature is to fight, we cannot suddenly stop fighting because fundamentally we have material desire, and until and unless we have material desire, we cannot renounce activity. So Krishna is saying it's better for you to, for anyone to be a sweeper on the street, an honest worker, linking his work to the Supreme, rather than uh, artificially give up, false renunciation, artificially give up your duty and go and sit in the forest and meditate. So here our author Srila Prabhupada, who we described earlier, wonderfully describes, for self-realization one can live a controlled life as prescribed in the Shastras and continue carrying out his business without attachment. In that way we make progress. So we can be a doctor, we can be an engineer, we can be a software person, whatever we are, right? We can have children's parties, whatever our job is. Many of you are in such varied professions. Whatever we are, we can continue to do. We don't have to give up what we do in order to live a spiritual life. We have to detach ourselves from the fruits of the activities. We will see that shortly. But we don't have to give up our spiritual life. The recommendation of the Bhagavad Gita is not to change our situation, but change ourselves internally. So this whole process of reading the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita is an internal process. The whole process of becoming happiness is an inside job. It is not the externals. It's not how we look. When we were at the farm, you can see the devotees at the farm wear a particular kind of dress. They wear tilak. They have markers such as they wear these tulsi beads and so on. Those are all externals. But their real spiritual growth is internal. Whenever we talk to the residents of Gita Nagari, we feel happy. Why? Because they carry their happiness within their heart. So it is an internal process, not an external process. So we should not artificially give up our occupation. We should not artificially give up our family. We should not artificially give up our duties. We should perform our duty. But how we should perform our duty, Krishna describes. Nityam kuru karma tvam. Perform your prescribed duty. For doing so is better than not working. But again, Arjuna clarifies. But you said already, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if I perform my duty, won't that lead to bondage? If I perform karma or the action, won't that lead to reaction? Karma phala, which is the Sanskrit word for reaction. And Krishna says, don't do karma, do karma yoga. What is the difference between karma and karma yoga? Karma yoga leads to no reaction. Let us see how. So perform the activity but without the bandhan, without the bondage, without the attachment. So this is a very important teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, my dear friends. So please listen carefully here. Perform your activity not for the results. Do your work as a duty. Do your work as a sacrifice. Do your work for the Supreme Lord's satisfaction, for God's satisfaction. This is one of the tenets of the Bhagavad Gita, is we do not give up our work, which is very important teaching also from the Bhagavad Gita. We do not give up uh, our activities, our professions, our family, and we do not perform that work for the results of the work. If I go into work and I do really well in my next review, I get a higher pay, I get more recognition. If I take care of my daughter, she will take care of me when I am older. If I take care of my wife, she will be pleased with me and do things for me and so on. That is not how we act. That is not our consciousness. If I go into work and do my duty, the Lord is pleased. I am satisfied. I am happy because the Lord is happy. If I take care of my daughter, I do it out of love for her. I serve my wife out of love for her, as a duty, as a sacrifice. So sacrifice, what does that mean? It's a very seminal verse of the Bhagavad Gita. I won't read the Sanskrit, but I'll read the translation by Prabhupada. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. Very, very important lesson from the Bhagavad Gita is perform work as a sacrifice. Perform work out of duty. Otherwise, it will bind us. There will be a reaction to the work. If we perform work out of sacrifice and duty, it will be purifying. If we perform work out of selfish desire and not out of the I-centric model instead of the you-centric model, when we perform work in the I-centric model, there will be a reaction to that work, and you will be in that bondage. You will be bound to this material world. Ukti, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes. My question is, even though your actions are without attachment or without expecting any fruits, do they still not cause a reaction to the soul?
They do not. They do not. For example, at the end of all this 700 verses, Arjuna understood that he should fight not because he wants to get the kingdom or please his wife to whom injustice was done, but because it is his duty, first of all. Second, out of love for Krishna, because this is all Krishna's plan. He fought and he killed many living entities, but he did not receive the reaction to killing the living entities because it was his duty. So when you perform things out of duty, the soul doesn't get reaction. Does that make sense, Ukti?
It makes sense, but it's very hard to digest.
Yes. Please stay with us as you go through the various chapters, as you go through this first 6 chapters, the sort of the process of the individual living entity, and then enter into the next 6 chapters. In the 7th chapter, this is further clarified. So just stay with us. Once you go through further material, it will become more and more clear.
Yeah, peace. How you doing? I have a quick question. So I don't know, maybe the following chapters will explain this, but there are some people who do, I would say, negative things, for lack of a better word, but they feel like it. But they feel like it's their duty. Like, for example, right? A clear example: Hitler felt like it was his duty to purify the white race, and so he attacked Africans as well as Jews and so forth, and he felt like it was his duty. So what about in that regard, where someone or some people feel like it's their duty, but it's a negative thing?
So that is not his real duty. He didn't know his real duty. What we have to be very careful. In the name of duty, we cannot do injustices in this world. Then we will have severe reaction. Duty is given to us by God. So we have to carefully study the Bhagavad Gita, be very self-aware, and understand our duty in the first place. In the Vedic times, there was this wonderful system of Gurukula. It's called Gurukula, means it's like a teacher to student school. It's where the kids would go and stay with their teacher for a period of time, and the teacher would carefully evaluate. Teacher would be, first of all, very, very qualified and will understand psychology of how to evaluate his students and so on, and he'll carefully evaluate what is the nature of this living entity, and based on that nature, the student will be educated on one of the various occupations which are appropriate for his nature, and he would understand his duty. But this system is broken now. There are no longer as many persons who can do such an evaluation. But we have to take the guidance of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is directly speaking to us in the Bhagavad Gita, and our own spiritual practice leads us to self-awareness to understand our duty. Hitler severely misunderstood his duty. There are very fundamental principles in this world. You do not kill based on the body. Here Arjuna did not kill because someone was of some race or someone was of some religious subscription. Arjuna killed the perpetuators of crime, perpetuators of injustice. It's very different. I acknowledge your very important point. It is easy to mislead ourselves. What is our duty? We have to be very careful. Okay, we'll continue. Then Arjuna asks why we perform work as sacrifice. Because Krishna not only said do it out of duty, but work should be done out of sacrifice to the Supreme Lord to avoid bondage. So Krishna then says that a long time ago the Lord set up this system such that there is balance between human beings and nature. So we exist in this material world. So I think we all understand quite well this point already, given the world we live in and given the fact that we are all very sensitive individuals and very aware of what is going on around us. Because of exploitation of resources in this world, because of over-reliance on fossil fuels, for example, and over consumerism in this world, we have imbalanced nature, and greenhouse gases are increasing in the atmosphere, and there is global warming, and that is going to lead to severe repercussions, sea levels rising, flooding of certain places, hurricanes and tornadoes in certain places. In the United States alone, I was reading a climate report which said the incidence of hurricanes compared to the previous 50 years, in the last 50 years, especially in the last couple of decades, has gone up by an order of magnitude. This is because as the global temperatures rise and the seawater becomes hotter, the conditions for a hurricane become very more optimal. So when we do not act in harmony with nature, nature fights back. But if we act in harmony with nature, if we do our duty as a sacrifice, so Krishna, God has set up a system where if we do our duty out of sacrifice, nature will give the resources. If there is imbalance, then then you can all see what is happening with global warming and things like that. So then Arjuna wants to know, what about those who do not perform sacrifice? And Krishna very strongly, in very strong language, he calls them a thief. Such a person who does not perform his activity as sacrifice is a thief. He is stealing from not only God but from others, because we have this body, we have a nature, we have a duty, and we have to perform our work in harmony with nature as a sacrifice. If we don't do that, we are imbalancing nature, we are harming others, and we are taking away from that which is not us. So we are thieves. And Krishna gives this example of offering food. So we take so much from nature. Everything we eat comes from nature. These days, when you ask children, they seem to think that milk and vegetables come from the refrigerator, because they have never been to a farm or never seen a cow in their lives, perhaps, especially here in Singapore. But that is not so. Everything comes from this earth. Everything is given to us by God. Whether we have fruits or vegetables or whatever we eat in one form or the other, it comes from nature. And as a sacrifice, if you ever go to the Ganges, for example, we perform this activity as part of the second retreat in April. Those of you who came for the second retreat, you did this. We went to the river nearby and we performed a Ganga Yajna, Ganga sacrifice, where we took the water and with gratitude, we offered it back to the river. Just like that, we take the food stuff, we prepare, we take the fruits and vegetables and whatnot, and we prepare various dishes and we offer it back to God, back to nature. So this is a practice that is followed by Bhakti Yogis. Anything we eat, we first offer it back to God, because we are grateful for what we receive. So there is this wonderful book by Paul Rodney Turner on food yoga, how one can eat, because the question comes up, right? Even if you eat a vegetable, for example, there are certain vegetables where you have to end the life of the plant and eat it, right? So are you really non-violent and in harmony with nature if you eat those vegetables? For certain grains, you have to harvest the whole plant in order to take those grains, process them, and eat it. So if you eat those grains at the expense of the life of the plant, are you really non-violent? Because plants, and not just human beings, animals and plants are also living entities. They are also spirit souls. So it is not our prerogative to kill them, right? So if you are talking about real non-violence, can you be non-violent even as a vegetarian or vegan? That is the question they ask. If you offer it back to God in this way, and you only perform that violence minimally, wherever some grains are required or some vegetables are required, you take them, but you don't, as far as possible, you don't harm the living entity. And you offer it back, very importantly, like you took the water of the Ganges and you offered it back to the river, you offer it back to God, then there is no reaction. This is Food Yoga, nice book, thought I'll recommend. So there is this cycle of sacrifice. The Supreme Lord gives us the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic literatures, where prescribed duty is given to us. Just like True asked earlier, what is the duty, right? Was Hitler performing his duty? Hitler was not performing his duty. It is not prescribed in the Vedic literatures. It is not prescribed by Krishna. So the prescribed duty is given where it is said you perform your actions as a sacrifice, and that leads to resources from nature, and that leads to health and prosperity for living entities. In turn, the living entities offer it back to Krishna. So it is a wonderful cycle of harmony, which is missing perhaps in the modern world today. So that is the first half of this chapter. The second half will go faster, but I will end here. We have so far covered very important topics where Krishna is teaching Arjuna step by step. Perform your duty, perform your work as your duty, perform your work as a sacrifice. Do not renounce out of turn. You cannot give up your duty out of turn. Very important teachings. So we'll break for some group discussion. Yamuna Prabhu, can you help me?
Yeah, I just created the groups. Hi, Erica. Do you
Hey, we
thumbs
were
up?
just we weren't sure what we were supposed to do in our group.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can discuss reflections, things that you sort of got reinforced for you, or any application points from what you guys heard.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
We have returned. Our first.
Yeah. How did it go?
Good. We're both aligned with the same lines of thinking exactly from our takeaways.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I hope all of you had a good sharing session, breakout session. Perhaps towards the end, we can open the floor up for sort of sharing what you guys discussed, what you felt. But please let me go through the rest of the subject matter of this third chapter now. Yamuna Prabhu, can I begin? Is everyone back?
Yeah, everyone's back.
All right. So we stopped here. We have discussed why we have to perform work as a sacrifice. And Arjuna then goes on to ask, so what about, so you're saying I should perform my activities, become a karma yogi without attachment to results, means karma karma yogi. But what about these people? The people who have more of an inclination to think and contemplate rather than to do. The jnanis, they renounce. So, should that category of people not exist? That's his question. And Krishna says, a self-realized person has no material duty as they have no material desire. In other words, Krishna is saying, if you want to renounce, O Arjuna, you have to first give up material desire. When you are beyond material desire, you don't have to fight. But remember, previously also Arjuna said, I don't want the kingdom. I don't want this money and this fame. I want to run away from this battle because I don't want to kill anyone. And Krishna here, he reminds Krishna of this here. I said, I don't have material desires, so why should I fight? Then again, Krishna says, as a matter of duty. But here, the duty he is talking about is setting an example. Arjuna is a very enigmatic leader. He was relegated to living in the forest and incognito for more than a decade. More than a decade, he was away from day-to-day life and meeting people. But he was so enigmatic, so popular, that between him and his brothers, they put millions of soldiers together in an army, even though they had just come back from the forest. They have just come back from hiding from regular people. They still were powerful enough, popular enough, enigmatic enough, seen as leaders to put together such a big army with millions of soldiers ready to die for their cause. Okay, so he was a very enigmatic leader, and if he did not do his duty, these other people will follow him, because Krishna says very soon in the following verses, the common man does what the leader does. He follows in his footsteps. So as a matter of duty to these people, even if you don't have material desire, don't give up your action. And Arjuna very interestingly asks, please can you give me an example of a person who led in this way? And Krishna gives the example of Janaka Maharaj, the father of Sita Devi. We will describe about Janaka Maharaj some other day. But this is a great leadership lesson. The Bhagavad Gita is full of lessons for different aspects of life. Whatever we are, whether we run a company, whether we are a leader of a team, or whether we are working in an office and we have our family and so on, whatever our life situation is, we will lead something somewhere, right? So it's very important to understand the first lesson of leadership, as described by Krishna here to Arjuna, is to lead by example. In Sanskrit terminology, there is prachar and there is achar. Prachar means speaking what is right and telling people what is right and hearing them out and engaging in that exercise. But higher than that is achar, which is showing by example. If we lead our lives, even if we don't have material desire, if we lead our lives in the right way, somebody somewhere will follow. For me, for example, at the bare minimum, my daughter, who is impressionable and just about 20 months old, she imitates anything and everything me and my wife do. So me doing actions which are correct, which are within the codes of scriptures, which are out of duty, which are out of love, she will imitate. So that is also our duty, is to set the right example, Krishna is saying. Very powerful verse. Whatever action a great man performs, a common man follows. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So I showed in the first introduction presentation a very inspirational quote, very inspirational testimonial by one of you, where you wrote, if only world leaders and influencers and politicians and thinkers and so on came to Geethanagari and stayed for a year. That was your feedback from attending the retreat. And Krishna is saying that here. So all these world leaders and kings and politicians and ministers have a huge role to play in general people's lives, and they should set the right example. That is leaderships. That is 101 of leadership. Then Arjuna, very interestingly, maybe mirroring our mind, he asked this question on our behalf. Krishna is easy to say but difficult to do. And to that Krishna says, I also do. What does Krishna need, right? He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is God himself. He has no needs. He doesn't have to work. There is no prescribed work for him. He doesn't lack anything. He doesn't have material desire. He's completely self-satisfied. But he also does his duty. Because if he doesn't, then people will follow him and do the wrong thing. Just to set the example, even Krishna does his duty. In fact, very interestingly, Krishna, when he was on this planet, he took a teacher, a guru. Why does Krishna need a guru, right? But he took a guru, he attended classes, he set the right example for all of us. Then Arjuna asks, again, very, very good question. How do I identify what are the symptoms of a person who is working in knowledge as opposed to ignorance? Very important question. Another very seminal lesson of the Bhagavad Gita coming up. And Krishna says, the person who is working in ignorance thinks of himself as the doer of activity. What does that mean, right? If we are not the doer of the activity, then who is the doer of activity? And Krishna says there is not just one doer. He will explain further throughout the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the 13th chapter. There are 3 doers, ladies and gentlemen. One, we are the doer from the point of view of being the desirer of activities. We have desires, so we desire. Second doer, the modes of material nature, set everything into action, and they actually do the activity. They are the primary doer. The third doer is the Supreme Lord, who is Upadrishta Anumanta, in the words of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which means Upadrishta means overseer, and Anumanta means permitter. He is the overseer and permitter of all activities. So this is the model of doership in this world. In fact, there is this beautiful example given in Katha Upanishad. Our situation is compared to a chariot. The body of the chariot is compared to our body, the hands and legs and limbs. The chariot has 5 horses. The horses are compared to our 5 knowledge acquiring senses: seeing, smelling, touching, speaking, hearing, and so on. The reins that are tied to the horses, the ropes that are tied to the horses, are compared to the mind, because the senses congregate around the mind. This is the nature of our body. And the driver is compared to the intelligence, because the intelligence is supposed to drive our mind, which is supposed to drive the senses. This is the right way. If you want the chariot to go in the right direction, the intelligence has to direct the mind, and the mind has to direct the senses. It cannot be the other way around. If external stimuli affect our senses, and the senses all want to go in different directions, the 5 horses are going in the different directions, and the mind is not strong enough to hold them back, and the intelligence is not strong enough to direct the mind, then our life will be all over the place. And very interestingly, in this analogy, there is a passenger in the chariot. Any guesses who the passenger is in the analogy? Anyone?
Your soul?
Yes, thank you. The soul. We are just the observer and the desirer. As the passenger, we tell our intelligence, I want to go to Singapore, I want to go to Boston, I want to go to Chicago, and the chariot driver, the intelligence, then directs the mind, the reins, and the reins direct the senses, and we get there, right? In this case, the direction goes to my fingers, and I go online and book flight tickets. So we are just the observer and desirer of activities. Material nature makes activities happen, and the Supreme Lord permits and oversees everything. This is very important, and it will be described in much greater detail in the future chapters. So, if a wise person works, why he works and for whom he works. And Krishna clarifies here, for me. Yes, for me. Give up your material desire, also your lethargy, and fight for me. Those who work like this will be free from bondage. What a beautiful lesson. So Krishna is saying, fight for me. He's talking to us also directly. Don't give up your work. Perform your spiritual activities. Understand the Bhagavad Gita. Chant every day. But continue to be a dentist. Nilesh is a dentist or an orthodontist, one of those. So continue to be an engineer. Yamuna is an engineer. Continue to be an entrepreneur. Erika is an entrepreneur. So whatever we are, we continue our activities, and we do it for Krishna. We do it for God. So we move from the I-centric model, my desires, my needs, my family, my friends, my society, to putting Krishna in the center, which means to put everyone else in the center, to the you-centric model. So we get up in the morning and we do everything as a service because we have the well-being of everyone in our heart. That's what it means to be in the you-centric model. It's no longer just my needs and my family and so on. It is this is for Krishna. That is what step by step, systematically, Krishna is doing in terms of moving the consciousness of Arjuna and others from the I-centric to the you-centric model. So duty performed based on this knowledge take one from bondage to freedom. Another great lesson from this chapter, Krishna also says it's very important to perform your own duty. Do not live another person's life. Very important advice, sage advice, especially for younger people who are beginning to select their career and path in life. It's very important that they understand. And all of us know younger people, even if we ourselves have already selected our professions and we can pass this on to them. It's important that they understand that it is better to perform our duty, even if not perfectly, rather than perform somebody else's duty. because we all have a specific nature. We cannot get away from that. I have a specific type of body. Suddenly, if I decide to become like Usain Bolt and run 100 meters in 8.5 seconds, not gonna happen. Because I have limitations on the body where it's not going to happen. I can train; it will be a valiant exercise, but it's better that I solve partial differential equations and Usain Bolt runs like a cheetah. That's our constitutional natures because we have this particular type of body. Only by doing work according to one's psychophysical nature, one can even get material happiness. Even material happiness, which is ephemeral and has the other side of the coin, which is material misery, is possible only if we perform our own activity. So many people ask us, why am I so dissatisfied with my job? I'm making enough money. I have a good title and position in my company. I have great responsibilities, but I'm still miserable going into work. Most likely it's because we selected a profession which is not in line with our psychophysical nature. Final section of this chapter. It will take just another 5 minutes, but very important point. So, whole chapter has been on duty. Perform your work as duty, perform your work as sacrifice, and perform your own duty, not somebody else's duty, even if you cannot perform it perfectly. And Arjuna asks, but Krishna, this many people know, but why do some people, even after knowing this, are not able to do your duty? Not doing your duty is a sin. So why are some people not able to do their duty, Arjuna asks. And Krishna says, Kama yesha krodha yesha. Very, very popular verse. Lust is the enemy of duty. Lust stops you from doing your duty. Lust is your greatest enemy. For one who wants to do his duty, lust is the greatest enemy. You pinned it down. It's not easy to win over this enemy. Very, very honest and important point. When we have a teacher, one who is as qualified as Krishna here, we have to be open and honest with them. That is, otherwise we cannot receive instructions. And Arjuna is being completely vulnerable and saying, it's not easy for me to win over lust. This is a person who conquered sleep. He is called Gudakesha, one who conquered sleep. He would practice archery in the dark throughout the night. And then in the morning, whole day and night, he would practice. Conquered sleep, conquered eating, sleeping. Very, very powerful warrior. There was no one. He was like I said before, the Michael Jordan of his time of archery. So Krishna is giving him confidence. You can do it. You have a human body. So, like I said before, our true nature is we are spirit souls, and the material desire and lust covers our true nature. And there are various levels of coverings depending on the type of body we get. The trees, for example, are quite inert because their true nature, Sat, Chit and Ananda, which I described earlier, eternity, full of knowledge and full of bliss, is covered heavily. It's compared to the covering of the womb, covering the embryo. The animals have a lesser covering. They are more closer to their true nature. Their covering also is quite heavy though. And it is compared to the dust covering the mirror. When there is dust on the mirror, you can't see yourself. Finally, the human body is compared to smoke covering fire. Smoke covers fire, but not so much we cannot understand things. So we have this rare opportunity after taking so many lifetimes in so many different bodies. We have this rare opportunity of having this human body where the covering is minimal. So take advantage, O Arjuna. This is your chance to go beyond the eye-centric model. That is what Krishna is telling. And then Arjuna asks, Arjuna is a military man. He likes military strategy. So he asks, how do I fight this enemy? You have told me lust is my enemy, which is the inner battle he is fighting. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we need to understand the external battle of the Kurukshetra is secondary to the inner battle that Arjuna is going through. This is why the Bhagavad Gita is relevant today after 5,000 years for all of us. None of us are in the battlefield. None of us are archers. None of us have been done the injustice of our wife being disrobed in the assembly of the warriors or anything like that. But we fight this inner battle. That is why this is so relevant to us. And Arjuna wants to know, as a military man, how do I fight this inner battle? So as a military man, when there is an enemy, he wants to know the location, he wants to know the weakness. Krishna knows this, and immediately he goes there. He says the location of lust is in your senses first, then in your mind, and in your intelligence. But the enemy is the weakest at your senses. So we saw this at the end of the second chapter also, where we saw the example was given of the sthita prajna, a person whose intelligence is fixed. Such a person withdraws his senses into himself. He doesn't just freely and randomly engage with the outside world. He does all his activities without engaging in unnecessary sensual activities. And the example was given of a tortoise or a turtle withdrawing its limbs into its shell. And even a lion cannot kill the tortoise in that situation. Similarly, if we can control our senses, controlling the senses is fundamental to any type of yoga. If we can control our senses and not randomly engage them in anything and everything, that is the first step of attacking this enemy, lust. Second, you control the mind. Once the senses are controlled, you control the mind. This is the topic of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And then finally, control your intelligence. Very wonderfully described by Krishna. And then he also goes on to say what is required for victory over this enemy of lust. Spiritual intelligence is required to control our senses, control our mind, control our intelligence. We cannot randomly control these things. It's very, very difficult. We will see later on in the 6th chapter, Arjuna will say, Chanchalahi Manakrishna. The mind is so fickle. In fact, in the Vedic literatures, there is a beautiful verse where the mind is compared to a monkey. Not a monkey cannot sit in one place. It's oscillating from one place to the other place to the other place. And not just any ordinary monkey, an intoxicated monkey. And not just any intoxicated monkey, an intoxicated monkey which is bitten by a scorpion. So this is the nature of our mind, is it's like an intoxicated monkey bitten by a scorpion. Will that sit in one place? No. So it's difficult to control our mind. We need spiritual intelligence to control the mind. In other words, we need spiritual knowledge to transcendental knowledge to control the mind. This is the end of the 3rd chapter. In the 4th chapter, this transcendental knowledge is the topic. So you can see the flow, so systematic. Begins with the doubt. Doubt is the beginning of the spiritual journey for many of us, may Arjuna included. And then Krishna describes identity to clarify who we are. Then we see here duty is clarified, and lust is the enemy of duty, and the antidote to lust is spiritual transcendental knowledge. So transcendental knowledge will be described in the 4th chapter next week, 8 p.m. Sunday Eastern Time by Yamuna Prabhu. Alright, I've already taken more than my share of time. I will stop here and open it up to questions and sharing, please. Anyone? Any questions, thoughts? Yamuna Prabhu, any additions and corrections from your side?
Corrections. That's interesting. No, absolutely none.
You would have made some mistake.
Well, the only correction I might offer is Usain Bolt's not 8.5 seconds; it's 9.5 seconds for 100.
I already told you I'm not a sporting person. Please excuse. That is very fast, though, isn't it? 9.5 seconds, 100 meters. Probably takes me a couple of minutes to get there. All right, there are no further questions. We appreciate your time and your focus. Very grateful for